Yeah, this session is actually a beginner session. So I see some senior people here. Let's see if I'm not boring you. So it's about commandlet design and creating intuitive commandlets that are especially made for, a non-experienced PowerShell audience. So what are the tools that you have at hand to build code that is easy to use? Before we are going into that, we want to thank our sponsors. Without them, this whole conference wouldn't be possible. And some words about myself. I'm Raymond since more than 20 years with Microsoft, and was always interested in operations and development. And since 2007, we have a term for that, which is DevOps. So I always try to build bridges between developers and ops people. So my main project I'm working with is Automated Lab. Konstantin will do some sessions later about that product. DSC, the DSC workshop in general, and also M365 DSC. So, what is good programming? Good programming is, a program has 3 high-level goals. First of all, solves a specific problem. That means if you are writing a PowerShell script or a function, think about what you actually want to solve and only do that and nothing else. So we often see scripts that have a weird name. So by the name, you have no idea what the script is actually going to do. And it does not only tackle a single problem, but a bunch of problems. And depending on the parameters, it sometimes does very different things. So try to really analyze what is the goal and what is absolutely necessary to get things done. And all the things that are not according to the goal resolution or the goal solution should go into a different dependency, different function, different module, whatever, right? So be very precise in what your code actually should do. Next important thing is easy to read. And easy to read means we need code style. We need a common understanding about how code should be designed. Many people, many organizations think that code style is not very important, but it is. Because otherwise you're having trouble reading your colleague's code. And especially if it is about automated formatting. If you don't have a style guideline that you have agreed upon, there is no way of automatic formatting. Because then everyone formats things in a different way. We'll see later what that means. And easy to maintain and easy to execute. Especially easy to maintain and easy to read is somehow interconnected, right? We want to have as less code duplicate as possible. So try to remove all the duplicate code that you have. Of course, we always try to do this and write functions as soon as we have some duplicate code. Easy to maintain also means making your code modularized. So sometimes I see scripts of about 1,500 lines. So then obviously something has gone wrong, right? If you have one function of 1,000 lines, just understanding what the purpose of the function is very difficult, and it's even more difficult to find a flow through the function, right? Usually you have to use a debugger then to understand what's happening. Yeah, so modularization is a very important thing here. The article that I have linked in the slides is pretty nice to read. It's a good read if you want to get a little bit better understanding about what a coding mindset is. Actually, it's like, I've once read a description that a good programmer is like a painter, right? A good program is not just a functional thing that works. It's also beautiful in a certain way, right? And nice to look at. And not all the scripts that we open every day are nice to look at. Sometimes you just get, a scratch in the eye. Good. So where do we come from? And the guys that are working longer with PowerShell know that in the very beginning, we had the scripting guys. This was more like a Visual Basic invention, right? Ed Wilson was coming from the Visual Basic community and trying to do the same job for PowerShell. Then we started with the ISE, Power GUI, so some people may still know the names. And at some point in time, the PowerShell grew into an ecosystem. So it was not just a language and not just a simple editor. It was an ecosystem with Pasta, Script Analyzer, then came PowerShell Core. The DSC community, unfortunately, way too late, was defining many standards in this regard. Finally, we had Azure Pipelines to build code automatically, which should be the ultimate goal. And for that, we have Sampler, and Gail will do a presentation on Sampler and module design after that one. Right, so we came a long way, and finally we have a whole bunch of tools that makes code design and code development in PowerShell pretty easy and nice. And what are the rules that we have? Why do we need rules at all? So last year we did a tour through Siberia, and the roads there look like this, right? So you can do anything. Where you want to drive and what you want to do and how far you get is more depending on your car, right? So the car is the kind of restraint that you have. A typical street here in Belgium or in Germany usually looks like this, right? Because of the mass of cars and the many people that try to find their way, we need to have a lot of rules, otherwise things get very ugly, right? And also the PowerShell space has grown and grown and grown, and therefore we need some standards, some rules, some help that makes it possible to organize our life. Right? So this is why rules, guidelines, patterns, principles are very important, that not everyone does the same thing in a different way, requiring us to invest more time to understand the other person's idea, right? So, and these are the best practices that we have. Code should be, of course, portable. So if a script is running only in your test environment and not in the production environment, obviously you have failed. So things need to be adaptable and being able to automatically discover an environment. It needs to be modular, what we already said, right? So try to create as many functions as possible. Sometimes you see a function with only a one-liner in it. Does it make sense? For example, one method with only one line is the function is leap year, or the method is leap year. So there is the datetime class, and the is leap year function is only a one-liner. But the one-liner is kind of a very difficult formula. So definitely it makes sense to have a function for one line if the single line is not really easy to understand and needs some in-depth knowledge, right? So sometimes even a one-liner can be converted into a function to make it better readable. Scalability. Always test your code if it is not only running with the 5 to 10 objects in a test environment, but what happens if you have 1,000 objects, 500,000 objects, right? Does the code still work? And there are some things in PowerShell, for example, the plus equals operator, when adding something to an array, that can extend the the runtime of a script tremendously, right? So also test for scalability. Reusability, of course. So write code that is not only usable for that specific problem, but if you follow the modularization idea, usually your code can be reproduced or reused in other projects as well, right? And then at some point in time, you get a function library that makes it easier to start a new project because the basis is already set. Return always rich data structures. Give your data context, right? Not just return a single string without any context, and then the next guy who calls your script receiving the string does not really know where the string belongs to, right? We have PS custom objects, we have classes. All these tools make it very easy. And then we have naming conventions and style. And I think this is underrated, but also a very important thing that I will show in practice later. So these are the kind of the best practices for coding in general, not specific to PowerShell. But PowerShell comes with a lot of tools. These are the tools and patterns, or your tools and patterns, to kind of make your scripts beautiful and functional. And I would like to focus on these ones first, right? So it's about command design. So very important. If it was commanders or functions, parameters, right? Parameter binding. Actually, this one shouldn't be highlighted. We want to add pipeline support, custom modules, all these things, right? Modules will be covered also in the next session. Good. So where do we start? No. Okay, so, and if you see all these functions or tools that we have, don't try to implement a pattern or a tool just because it's there, right? Every tool has its purpose, and sometimes it doesn't fit into your design. And I faced this issue 2 times. Once was with regular expression, right? And I really like the sentence. Some people, when confronted with a problem, think, I'll use regular expression to actually solve a problem, right? And now they have 2 problems. And this happened to me a number of times, right? You think that regular expressions are the ideal way to do some pattern search. And then the regular expression gets longer and longer and more complicated. And at the end, you are investing a huge amount of time in fixing or extending the regular expression, but you haven't worked a single bit on your actual problem, right? So then obviously it was the wrong pattern. And the other one is PowerShell classes. So PowerShell classes are a very cool thing for the back end, but not for the front end. So unfortunately, I have one customer who completely skipped creating functions and did everything in classes. They are a good thing, but they don't give a user-friendly interface, right? You can't give a class to some first responder or support personnel, because first you need to instantiate it, you need to know the method doesn't simply work, right? And then this picture was quite nice. So this guy kind of having now a problem factory because these classes are not accepted by the audience and then had to be converted into functions. So let's see. How can we design a function that is accepted by the audience? And what did we want to focus on? We want to focus on, again, on custom objects, pipeline support. And let me get my zoom it here. This is covered in the next demo, pipeline support as well. We don't have the pass-through demo. Do you guys know who knows what pass-through is? Okay, half of the board. So usually some PowerShell functions normally should not return data, right? So I'm always annoyed if I want to create a folder like with makedir, and makedir always returns the new object, right? I'm more a friend of the pass-through pattern that a PowerShell command is not returning anything if stuff works. But if you want to have the data in return, then you add the pass-through switch and get it back. For example, Active Directory commanders work that way. If you create an organizational unit and creating the OU worked, there is just silence. You don't get anything back. You have to use pass-through in order to retrieve the newly created OU to work with it in a variable or something else. Okay, so we will also cover, of course, functions. We are not covering verbose and debug logging. I think this is very important, especially if your function grows and is a bit more complex. Less for the users, but more for yourself. So if something goes wrong, then you can tell the user, please add the verbose switch, send me the output so I get a better understanding about what went wrong, right? So verbose logging is pretty important and very easy to implement, especially now with Copilot, right? So if you use Copilot, Copilot in general generates very good debug messages automatically. So it's less typing for you and richer output. Splatting was not part of the list. This was a mistake. We will have a look at command binding and, of course, on parameters and comment-based help. Good. By the way, comment-based help, I don't like it that much anymore. I rather tend to migrate my help in Markdown files, because then they are at the same spot as the code, but better to read, renderable in HTML. It's much better. Okay, so how can this look like? Yeah, I have a little project here, PowerShell training, and what we do is we have a one-liner, and this one-liner is what it's actually doing. Creating a PowerShell script that grows over time. Yeah, the purpose of the script is to find small files and return the overall size. So, pretty easy task, right? We are starting with a one-liner that finds all files, then calculates the total file size. Then we are extending it to give us all the files that are less than 100,000 bytes. And then we want to convert this into a function for reusability. So the one-liner with the calculation of the size, then with filtering in two different flavors, with a script block and with the parameters. And finally, we have a little function. Right? I mean, that's pretty easy. As I mentioned, it's a session for beginners. So next thing is, a function is worth almost nothing if you have hard-coded values in it. So that's one of the big don'ts. Never put hard-coded values in a script that could be made a parameter. Paths, password, of course, for sure as well. Everything that is controlling your script should be either in an external configuration file, should be a parameter, but not hard-coded. So next thing is then parameters. So what do you think? What can be parameterized in here? Let's see. First of all, we have the path, of course. We want to make this function not only working in my current directory or in a predefined directory, we want to have a parameter, right? And we want to have also a parameter for the max size. And what is very important with parameters is that you fail immediately if the input is not as expected. And the easiest way to validate your input is adding types, right? There shouldn't be a single parameter without a type definition. And even if you don't really know what kind of input you get, at least write object there so that it's indicated that we have actually no clue what we're going to receive. But then your code needs to kind of examine the input to do the right actions. Okay. And then, of course, a function should not even start if some important piece of data is missing. So the next thing is, after having added these the types, is to make something mandatory, right? And this is some easy step that unfortunately still is missing in a lot of scripts you see in the wild, right? So they don't use parameters. They have just some hard-coded values at the top, which makes the script inflexible, even a bit error-prone, and that's the easiest way to make it, as it should be, right? So always invest a little bit more time into the parameter handling because this makes other people's life easier to use your code. Okay. If there are any questions in the middle, just happy to answer. So the next thing is parameter validation. So we had some kind of validation by adding the string, but now we want to validate the value in there. So we have validate attributes that we can add to a parameter. One attribute is validate range. So the input should be between 1. So we don't want to go into the negative values. And the max value is long max value. So pretty much actually, right? And if you need to test a pattern that is not covered with a default or a standard validator, then just use validate script, which is now much better in PowerShell 7. In PowerShell 5, validate script was a little bit limited, especially the error message, right? And then you can test, is my path available and is it a container? So input validation, very important as well. Okay, then maybe it might be quite helpful to support array values, right? And by the way, let's invoke the function. Let's see if it actually works. Let's do it. New script. How is my debugger configured? Run interactive. No, that's not so good. Launch current file and save this as test. Cannot validate parameter path. Yes, because path is a file. And remember, what we wanted to do is we wanted to check for the path type container. So the script immediately fails. As soon as we get to something that is okay, then we get our data back. So we have 20 files we consider small based on the default value here of 100 kilobyte. And these files have a size of roughly 0.5 megabyte. So works as expected. Good. If we want to make this also working not with the single folder but multiple folders, of course we can extend our little scripts to support array values and even wildcards, right? So make it comfortable. It's the parameter handling is all about making things comfortable for the audience the script is intended to, right? And therefore wildcards, if we deal with paths, are usually pretty nice. So here we go. Now what we do is we take our paths and we pipe them, or we give them to resolve path. So resolve path then returns the actual paths that matches the wildcard pattern. And then we can just hand this over to get child item. So now our script is be able to work with multiple directories. But let's have a look. Does this still work? 20 files. Let's do it like, comma, C backslash, or D backslash lab sources backslash. I think I have some small files here. Okay, so now we should have some more small files, and here we go. 23, and that's the total size. So what's the problem now? Now we have 2 folders. We have received the small files from 2 folders. We get a summary of 23, but what information is missing? Which folder? The context, right? At the very beginning, I said, don't just return small values without the context. So how can we add context to this result? And then we move forward to to this one here. So what we can do, of course, is we can return the individual items or the individual arrays that we receive. Then the output looks like this. So we have 20 files in Windows, and in System32 we have another 1,700 files. But still the context is missing, right? Now we have two individual objects, but we don't know where these objects actually were generated. So, and this brings us to a pattern that I almost use in any modern function, right? If I want to return data, I create myself a PS custom object because it's so simple to do. And then you have total control about what your function is going to return. Usually, these PS custom objects are just fine. If you want to be a little bit more strict and a little bit more reliable, then you go for classes, right? They can define yourself a class and then make this function always returns an instance of that specific class. Okay, and in our case, how does it look like? Let's go to the bottom here. In our case, it looks like this, right? So the parameter pattern looks the same. We run over each path that we have received. We generate a result, and then we can create a custom object that contains the path. So that's the context, right? We also know what was the max size that the user was looking for of files, the file size in total, the file count, and even the average size. I mean, now we have total freedom to add and remove values as it is required, right? And then what we get back looks like, no, something went wrong. Copy again. Okay. And now the result looks like this. And as we have now PS custom objects, it's also quite okay to do an FT star, and then you have this in a different, and in this case, even more readable format, right? So PS custom objects are a very easy tool to make your script usable and very easy to implement, very fast, very slim, and very interesting for the consumer, right? Who is using PS custom objects as often as possible? Why are you guys here? You know this already. Okay, good. How can we continue? The next thing that I would always like to add in functions is pipeline support. And the very important thing here is do it right from the beginning. Because at some point in time, your function has grown so much and you have so many functions not supporting the pipeline that you are not very eager to invest the time to convert all the functions. So we have this with Automated Lab. In Automated Lab, I think we have about 400-500 functions, and only 5 or 10 of them are supporting the pipeline. And this is pretty nasty from a user's perspective. But from a programmer's perspective, I don't have the time at the moment to do this, right? So if I would have done it right at the beginning, it would be a very easy task. But afterwards, converting it and testing it and do all the stuff is not so nice to do. So pipeline support from the very beginning. Who is working with pipeline support regularly? Yeah, okay. Also half of the room. Also a thing that is very easy to implement, right? So the only thing that we need to do is adding a begin, process, end block. So that's quite easy. And the other thing that we need to do is we need to mark the parameters that should come from the pipeline. In this case, for example, the path, right? So make the path a value from pipeline. How many parameters can accept pipeline input? 1. Actually, all of them. But then all get the same value, right? So it doesn't make sense, right? So only one parameter can accept pipeline input. But there is another way. There is value from pipeline by property name. And that's a very nice thing, because then what PowerShell does is it takes the input object and maps the property names of the input object to the parameter names and assigns the parameters one by one. So a completely automated mapping, and then you can have as many parameters as you want coming from the pipeline. If there is some naming conflicts and the names don't match, you can work with aliases, right? So if PowerShell doesn't find a property with the same name as the parameter but an alias, then it works as well, right? So this is one of the most powerful tools that we have for make a command that behaving intuitive and easy. Okay, so now we have pipeline input. And the thing is that you should always implement a for each loop, even if you're supporting the pipeline. So actually the pipeline is an internal for each loop, right? So it's just syntactic sugar, but under the hood, we are still doing, of course, for eaches. And another for each loop within the for each loop, because actually process is a for each loop. So we have a for each loop in the for each loop, but this allows you to still work with parameters and with the pipeline. Right, so for example, here we are calling the function by passing the path as a parameter value, and here we are doing the same with the pipeline. So that means either when we're using a pipeline, the process block is called as often as we get as many times as we get objects through the pipeline, right? The for each loop is called as often as we receive values through the parameters. So it's either, for example, in this case here, we are receiving 2 values through the pipeline, which means this block is executed twice. The for each block is just running once, but 2 times once. So it's 1 by 2 or it's 2 by 1, right? So always do both. It's slightly slower, but it makes your function totally flexible and works in both scenarios. Let's see if that works. Okay, Windows and program files, pipe to get small file. Yes, here we have value from pipeline. We have the process block. And if we run that, works just fine. And if we turn it the other way around and do a get small file, Copilot helps me a bit, then we have 2 times exactly the same values, right? So that's important to implement the for each loop as well as the value from pipeline. So process and for each. Good. Then you also may add a switch parameter for adding a summary, but that's kind of a special use case here, but I've found kind of valuable. So if let's go to the final version because I'm running out of time. So if we take the final version of the script, first of all, we have comment-based help, always recommended, right? So, and if you use something like Sampler can take the comment-based help and automatically convert it into Markdown files, so that you don't have to kind of write your help system twice and keep it in sync, right? So then this would be a primary help. Markdown is generated automatically. And here we have now the add summary switch. And all we do is in the begin section, we are creating a summary object. The summary object is filled within the process loop, right? So here we are adding something to the summary for each iteration that we do. And at the end, we are just returning the summary if the add summary parameter was defined, right? So this is also giving some context. And for example, if you want to migrate objects or move objects between directories, between Active Directories or whatever, then giving a summary at the end to tell the user, okay, this is what we have done actually, is kind of giving us a reassurance and helping us, knowing if our task really completed. And finally, if you call that, looks like this, that we have, did I call the summary? No, I didn't. Add summary, and then we have another summary object. Okay, so just give you data context. What I think is also important, and I want to emphasize this, is code style, right? Even if some people think it's just style, it's not adding any kind of functional value to my script, I faced numerous problems when not dealing with code style, but doing an automated formatting. One thing that we have missed badly in the ISE was automated formatting, right? So you have a huge script, 1,000 lines. The indentation was completely screwed, and you had to manually go through the script to make it beautiful again. So in Easy Steroids, that's an add-on from Tobias Weltner, we have this functionality, and in VS Code, it's by default, right? VS Code, the PowerShell plugin of VS Code knows how to deal with styles. But it happens again and again that I participate in an open source project. I do my stuff, I do my changes, and after having done my changes, I press F1 and type in format document, or format document, Control-Alt-F, right? And then look at the code. It looks very different now, right? Something happened. Okay, no problem. I'm happy with the style. And then you create a PR request, a pull request, and you have to change only one line, a very easy pull request for at least reviewing. And then you look at your changes and you realize, okay, a bunch of lines have been changed because obviously the maintainer of the project used the indentation or the brackets in a different way than you did, right? So how can we overcome that problem? First of all, agree on a code style as an organization, right? So if everyone in your organization has a different understanding about where the bracket should be, things get ugly. It's not very important what kind of standard you choose, but choose a standard. That's important. And then this standard can be added to every project as a settings JSON, right? So that means even if some of your colleagues has chosen a different standard, at least Visual Studio Code knows about this different standard and can act accordingly, right? And what we do here is we just tell Visual Studio that these are let me undo this. These are the things that we have agreed on, right? For example, open brace on same line or new line after open brace, right? So just take the standard. If you don't like it, change it according to your wishes, but then move this file as a settings JSON to every of your code repositories. And then if we are going back to our file, pressing Alt-Shift-F, we are back to the normal standard. So even if I change now a single line, right, host test, right, save, Control F, it will remain only a single change, right? So code style is important. I remember yesterday you've been asked about the editor you use. And I think I was pretty surprised that, was it 80% or 90% are using VS Code? Almost nobody is using the ISE anymore. I still use the ISE for debugging purposes because it's just pre-installed on the server. But as soon as it comes to a development process, then I switch to VS Code, which gives you all these little things here. Okay. Good. This is about code style. Did you know about the settings JSON and the code style implications? Okay. Another thing is that PS Script Analyzer, right? PS Script Analyzer is a very nice tool to kind of enforce these settings and give you a warning if your code does not comply to the code standard, right? Or if you are violating some very important things like an empty help message, for example, right? So, and VS Code or the VS Code rules can also be imported in the settings JSON. This is what we have here, right? So, and then VS Code knows about your VS or your script analyzer styles and gives you the warnings right in the editor, which helps pretty much changing or fixing your code before it's actually going to the pipeline and being tested there. Good. Settings JSON and then the linting tool script analyzer. Okay, questions so far? Yeah, I think easy stuff. Another thing that I would like to emphasize, always start with Git, right? So I've shot myself in the foot a number of times thinking that a little scripter project is just something that I finish in a day because it's just a very short thing to do, short living as well. And then there is another feature request and something doesn't work and another feature request. And then you have to stop for a week because you're working with another customer. And then you lose the code or you have duplicated it and you don't know what's the current version, what's the latest up-to-date version. So always start with Git. It only helps you to avoid mistakes, giving you an authoritative copy of your source code, right? I think who's not using Git nowadays? Okay. Good. So then, right. That's what the PowerShell training, the function. What is also quite interesting is the PowerShell style guideline. Also, updated last year. That's nice. So this is a very good reference if that helps you choosing how you should write functions, how you should, approach various design issues, or not design issues, but these design decisions that you have to make, right? So I find this is a very important read, as well as what the DSC community did. as well. Here we have style guidelines giving you an idea, for example, how we deal with white spaces, right? And then you have always an example for how to not do things and then how to do things. Yeah, so this is also quite good if you have maybe a less experienced developer in your company that you are mentoring, right? Good reference to tell people this is how proper code looks like, and please change accordingly. Okay. Good. So, when having breakfast, Konstantin brought me to the idea to add a slide about things not to do. Actually, there are not so many things, but one thing is very, very bad hard-coded values, right? We talked about this at the very beginning. Try to put everything in parameters or in configuration files, which can be next to the script, a JSON file, PSD1 file, whatever you like, or a YAML file. Try to avoid global or parent scope variables, right? I had big troubles with DSC because the DSC module, so the Microsoft DSC module, assumes that there are certain variables not being filled previously. So if you use a variable, I don't remember exactly what it was, for example, DSC module name, and you pre-populate the variable, then the DSC module doesn't work at all. It breaks, right? Because it expects the variable to be empty, but PowerShell can always read a parent scope variable, and if it is not empty, then the DSC module does something odd, right? So this is something that can go wrong. So try to avoid, especially global variables, try to avoid them at all costs, and be careful with parent scope variables. What is very hard for my eyes is variable and function names in non-English, right? So we have many German companies who are still sticking to German function names, and it's not going to work, yeah? Especially if you have a naming convention with English verbs, right? And then you have a German noun. This looks pretty odd, right? And don't store orphan code in productive scripts. I see this so often that there is a code block that you don't need anymore, but you don't want to remove it because maybe you need it in a year or in two. So your script grows and grows and grows, and at some point in time, 70% of the script is just green comments and the rest is productive code, and then you have no idea what's really needed, and it makes just the script hard to understand, right? So that's definitely a don't. The do's are always start with functions, not just scripts, because this gives you the flexibility to later get your function into a module. Modules will be covered in the next section. They are auto-discoverable. They offer you a bunch of nice features, so that's the way to go. Always support the pipeline right from the beginning, because usually later you won't have the time and energy to do this, or to add this feature. Invest some time, and I would like to... Still working? Yeah. Invest not some time. Invest a lot of time in parameter design, especially if you have a function that should work in multiple scenarios. Think about parameter sets, right? Which one command that we all know is invoke command. And invoke command comes with 30 parameter sets, so it's very heavy, it's heavily overloaded. But thanks to this overloading, it kind of works in all the scenarios that we need. You have the same feature at hand for your script. So just use parameter sets to make your script flexible. Implement pass-through and verbose where applicable. I mean, verbose is almost always applicable. Pass-through depends on the scenario. Then return data with context. Either you use PS custom objects, easy, or you define your own classes, a bit more complicated, but you have a reliable set of data that you get back in return. You have kind of a contract. Agree on a code style and always apply it, right? Otherwise, your pull requests are a bit messy. And always use Git. But as we've seen, you do already. So I think most of the things that are in this presentation is already a kind of standard for you. So I hope there was still something new, or maybe something that you already know but got back into your memory. Good. Questions? You do. Okay.
Sure. As comment, it's also important to name the parameters correctly across functions. So we don't use computer name, server, device, different.
Good point. Yeah. So. Yeah. So it's not a question; it's a comment. Actually, a good comment. Yeah. So the comment was, if you search for a name for a parameter, look at the other functions that you have already written, or at your colleague's function and try to harmonize the name, right? The good example is computer name. So most PowerShell commandlets use the parameter name computer name for getting input, right? If you go for device or machine name or just computer, things get ugly, right? So always try to stick to a kind of common pattern naming your commandlets. That's a good point. I will edit this to the slides. Yeah. Good. Anything else?
Do you have any hints about the directory structure for the common functions you use all the time, and especially for a project?
No. No, because it's part of the next session. Yeah. The next session is about module design. And then we are talking about public functions, private functions, configurations file, where to store them, right? So again, I want to point to Sampler because Sampler gives you a structure that fits almost all the purposes already. Yeah. Pardon? The tool that what? The tool Sampler. But you should stay here for the next session. Yeah, yeah. But so Sampler, thanks for that, Rob. Sampler is just a kind of gathering of all the best practices of the PowerShell community put into one project and one pipeline, one scaffolding solution, right? So Sampler is it's a very steep learning curve because it connects you to things that you might never have heard before, which is, for example, automated changelog management, automated versioning. What else do we have? PlotEPS for the help system, right? So it's like, it does everything. Yeah. 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 So I think for a small internal project, it might be a bit too much. But as soon as you have a project with a relatively regular release cycle, then it saves you a lot of burden, because what it also supports is completely automated release management. That means if you approve a pull request, then there will be a pre-release automatically published into the PowerShell gallery, which is very comfortable, right? And at some point in time, you think, okay, maybe my software is now ready. Let's release a full release. And this just works by adding a tag with a full release tag version to your project. And then a full release happens fully automatically without any intervention, right? So if you have the need of releasing modules in a very regular cadence, then Sampler is the way to go. And I think the next 90 minutes will be just about that one. Okay. Any other questions? Then I will leave the stage for Gail. Thank you very much.